Hi, good evening. I'm Maria Garcia. Again, I'm Assistant City Attorney.
Could you use the mic?
Oh, even closer. Okay, I'll get that closer.
I always looked at Bill as being my test whether we're being heard.
Okay, is this better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me better? Okay, so again, my name is Maria Garcia. I'm an Assistant City Attorney at the City Attorney's Office here in Lawrence. I just wanted to give some background on the legal landscape, the reason that we're talking about concealed carry in public buildings. In 2013, the Kansas legislature adopted a law. It's now codified under Chapter 75, and what it says is that local city and state-owned buildings, any government building is going to have to allow persons to carry concealed firearms in those buildings unless the building has established adequate security measures. Cities were allowed at the time this law came out to seek a 4-year exemption to the law, which meant that cities wouldn't have to allow firearms at that time or establish adequate security measures for 4 years. So a lot of cities in Kansas took that exemption, so they're currently under a 4-year exemption from it, including Lawrence. We had a resolution our city commission passed in late 2013. It was Resolution 7052, and it listed all of the city buildings that would be exempt from the law where persons still cannot carry firearms inside the building. The law defines adequate security measures, so once the 4-year exemption is up, the city would either allow firearms inside the buildings or set up adequate security measures, which under the law means electronic equipment and personnel. And it gives some examples of that, which would be metal detectors, metal detector wands, and then someone to staff those items. So I guess that's the background of the law. So currently, like I said, we have a resolution. We sent a letter advising the Kansas Attorney General that we've sought that exemption. And so we have it. It expires January 1st, 2018. And at that time, we'll either have to have those kinds of metal detectors and personnel at certain city buildings, or else concealed carry would be allowed inside. Here's this.
The law as it impacts the county is essentially the same. Part of getting that, whoops, I need to put this on, right? Part of getting that exemption was we had to adopt a plan for how we would provide security. And we were permitted to go into executive session to talk about that because security of the buildings is one of the exemptions under the open meetings law. The county commissioners adopted that and said, here's our plan for providing security in 4 years, and named every county facility we had so that we could stay under the existing law in effect as long as possible. And it expires for us essentially when that gave us a 4-year exemption, which means that we come under the full requirements of the law in late 2017, just like the city does. There are also facilities that are city-county facilities, and the key one is the Lawrence Douglas County Health Department. And we had already secured one building before this law came into effect, and that was the law enforcement building. When you think about everything that goes into courts, we weren't so concerned about terrorists coming in and shooting the place up at the time, as much as the fact that sometimes divorce battles and certain criminals sometimes come in really, really upset and might want to cause damage to someone or to the jail. And we had enough close calls in the law enforcement center over the years that I think back in probably 2007, 2006, we did what the current law would require us to do to be able to prohibit guns in buildings, and that is set up a metal detector. Now, as a practical matter, setting up a metal detector, first of all, the equipment costs $80,000 to $100,000 to start with. And it can't just be staffed with one person. It has to be staffed with at least 2 people. Now, you don't tell this to the security guards when you hire them, but basically when you have a security situation with metal detectors, like to go into a building, the logic is that a bad guy comes up with a gun, the first guard is dead, okay? He's gonna die, and the second guy has enough time to call to bring in the troops, okay? you can't run a metal detector operation at a door with one person because they pull the gun out and he's dead and they go in and nobody knows that it's happening, okay? So when you set up an operation to secure a building, you hire 2 trained people, okay? Well, 2 trained people means a police officer or a sheriff's deputy, and you've got to do it every hour that that door is open. So the personnel cost for manning 40 hours a week is in the neighborhood of about $200,000 a year when you add fringe benefits and all the other costs that go with it and the amount of time that the person's gone that you have to have somebody on vacation do it, okay? So the cost is inordinate. Now when you add to that the state legislature in its infinite wisdom last year passed a budget lid law that basically says you can't add any expenditures to your budget unless it's corrected by inflation. And if there's any growth in the tax base, you can't spend more money because of growth in the tax base. You have to lower the mill levy, okay? So the budget lid law that was passed last year puts all local governments in the position of every year cutting back just a little bit. So if you add an expenditure, which is what they're requiring us to do to be able to prohibit people from carrying guns into public buildings, you add that kind of expenditure, it takes an election to authorize it. Okay? Now, I want to talk about 2 specific buildings, one of which is under the county's jurisdiction, and the other of which is a joint responsibility of the city and the county. I'm going to talk about the courthouse first. We actually hired an architect to figure out what it would take to secure the old courthouse, building at 11th and Mass. And we basically there's a certain amount of space that's required in order to set up an operation where you check, you've gone through the routine, you take everything out of your pockets, you go through the thing, maybe it buzzes, maybe it doesn't, and then they wand you and you discover you have an extra big belt buckle that might be something dangerous, and then you load all that stuff back up and you leave. Okay, that entire operation, to make it work, takes a certain amount of space. So I'm naively thinking, you all have come in the handicap entrance to the Douglas County Courthouse down that ramp, that we can just kind of set that up in the entryway. No, there's not enough space there to secure it. And you gotta have it in the handicap entrance, because if you're gonna lock every other door, you've still gotta be able to make sure that in 5 or 6 years, when I'm still serving as the county administrator and I'm in a wheelchair, that I can get to my damn office, okay? So it's also required by law. So that has to be the entrance. So our choices, we had 2 choices figured out. First, I had this brilliant idea that we're already paying for the officers and the equipment for the law enforcement building. So let's set up a plaza in the middle of that green space between the 2 buildings, and then have secure hallways that go down both directions. So I've already paying for that staff. Then it's just a one-time cost of building some ridiculous contraption to control the people once they go through the metal detectors somewhere in the middle of that area. I thought that was brilliant. It wasn't. The architect explained to me why you've got to be able to see where the people come in, and there's not any way to do that with fewer staff. You've still got to have 4 staff to do it. And it's long and complicated, but my great idea didn't work. So the 2 ideas that we came up with for the old courthouse, I'd like to say one of them rapes the building, and the other one, Bill, you don't report back to the Sunday school class that I use those words, okay? One of them rapes the building, and the other one takes up about 30% of our usable space in the building. The first idea was to set up a metal detector operation at the east door, okay? If you know, going in the east door, you come into a glass area, you then go up a set of steps, and then you get to a landing and a door, and then you go up another set of steps, or you go down another set of steps. So to make that entrance accessible, we would have to tear out part of that stone wall, okay, that is the stone wall, to build a lift mechanism to be able to build an addition onto the building, ripping out part of that stone wall that was put in there in 1903. And if anybody touches that building, I'm not going to be happy, okay? It's one of my favorite, it is my favorite building in the city of Lawrence. Also, I happened to work there for a long time. But anyway, and build a lift mechanism, tear out the wall, and we'd have this modern contraption sitting on one side of the Douglas County Courthouse. That one would only cost $1.3 million to accomplish, okay? Just the capital cost. So the other, but it doesn't take up any space in the building. It just builds on to this nice little modern addition to a 1903 courthouse. The other possibility was to tear out the existing handicap ramp, build a plaza that would kind of funnel into that entrance, okay? Then run the entire security operation inside the building, which would require pulling out about 4 walls and take up about 3/5 of the space occupied by the county appraiser's office. Now, I'm quite sure 90% of the residents of Douglas County would not be brokenhearted if that was the function that we lost. That's supposed to be funny, by the way. But we then would have to rent space for those people someplace else. This one would cost $1.4 million, and plus the cost of the operation of the 2 officers and the metal detection equipment. So an ongoing cost of probably close to $200,000 a year, plus renting space for a county department that currently occupies the courthouse, and find someplace else for them to operate. And I'm quite sure there are places that would think we should find some unair-conditioned building for them until they consider we hold the hearings in the heat of the summer, and maybe we don't want those folks to be cranky when my hearing is being held. So both operations have a one-time cost of about $1.4 million or $1.3 million, plus a cost of an ongoing cost of about $200,000. There happen to be higher priorities on our radar. I'm sure some of you have heard about me talking about mental health and jail, and that's not the topic today, but that's a higher priority for us. The other building that, if there's one public building that I think ought to be secured that's not secured now in all of Douglas County, it's the Lawrence Douglas County Health Department. The Lawrence Douglas County Health Department has the Burt Nash operation. It has people that go for mental health services. And I don't want to say that people that go for mental health services are any more likely to be violent. But there are states that people that have mental illness are in on rare occasions when they're not on their medications. And a lot of the situations where you hear about public buildings being shot up, it's sometimes somebody that hasn't, gotten appropriate mental health treatment. And so I happen to think that if there's one building that ought to be secured, it is the Lawrence Douglas County Health Department. Now that's a building that is, well, it's owned by the city of Lawrence. It was built, it's operated, it's maintained with an interlocal agreement between the city and the county. And we split those costs 50-50, and we have since the building was built in 95 or 96. And we have gone in and made about $80,000 worth of improvements to the building based on a survey by the Lawrence Police Department to improve lines of sight and different things in the building, but it's not secured. If you think about the setup of that building, there are 2 public entrances, one on the north and one on the south, with parking lots on both sides. So the logistics of securing that building, if you leave both of those entrances open, is 4 people. Now you could lock down one side of that and have people walk all the way around the building from one side or the other to get to the door if they were unlucky enough to have come to work after 7:30, so the first parking lot's full. That could be done. There are also a lot of logistical problems in that building of other exits and how to secure those. So the fact that it's a building that's cooperatively operated, maintained, and built by the city and the county adds the complication that you've got to get both the city commission and the county commission to agree on the same year that the building needs to be secured and that the cost is going to be split. If you have only one commission, this county commission or the city commission, who thinks it ought to be done, but the other one's not willing to pay their half, you got to wait till next year when you maybe can get an agreement. So there's a lot of cooperative agreements, including the arrangement to build that building that I had a hand in negotiating and was really, really proud of. But the logistics of doing something in that building like this become more complicated every year thereafter. Okay, so those are the practical problems. Now, when you start talking about the fairgrounds, or you name just about any other building that the city has, this building, for example, the way the law is written, unless you spend that kind of money securing something, you have to let somebody carry a gun in, open or concealed, okay? Right now, I've got a little sign on the door that says you can't do it, but starting in 2017, sometime in 2017, late 2017, I gotta take those signs down, okay? And if I don't take those signs down, somebody comes and finds that sign is not there or is there when it doesn't have a right to be there after 2017, they got a right to sue the county for failure to comply with that law. Okay, when we got started, Lynn came in and she says, why don't you just tell the legislature to change the law? No, that's not correct. If I've got a metal detector on the building after the law becomes fully effective, and somebody comes up and has a gun or a knife or some weapon, you go through and it's discovered, and it would be discovered. We have a right to turn you away and say, you cannot bring that into the building. You can go back and put it out in your car and come back in. But once we have the metal detector set up, and that's the only entrance and they've got to come in that way, we have the right to say, no, you can't bring a gun into the building. I think the reason you might be a little confused about that is the situation of the state legislature, which to me makes no sense at all. They've got the metal detectors, they've got the secure entrance that you have to go in, but they've decided in their wisdom that they're safer if everybody who comes into the legislature is able to carry their gun. And so you go through the metal detector and they discover you have a gun. They say, well, you know, fine, bye, you can come on in.
I was wondering, does the city are there any plans, any place in place right now for securing buildings?
Sure.
Thank you. So we had some city staff review adequate security measures and reached a similar conclusion as Craig, that it's really personnel that's the most expensive thing, that there would have to be at least 2 people staffing the electronic equipment. So as far as our estimate, it would be about the same, and then you times that by however many buildings you would want to have secured. So our city commission will make the ultimate decision on whether to secure the buildings, what kind of adequate security measures to set up, how many personnel to hire, what buildings will be affected. We do have a study session scheduled for April 26th. It's part of the budget discussions where the city commission will consider for the first time this adequate security measure. So we'll be having discussions more later this year, so hopefully we can get some answers, but we are starting to discuss it because it's something that is such a large amount that it has to be budgeted. So the city does have plans to discuss it.
And if the city or the county, this one goes to the recording that gets recorded for posterity. This mic is to make sure that Bill has a chance of hearing us. So that's why we're trading two different mics back and forth. The situation with the county is similar. Anything that would be done by the deadline would have to be in the 2017 budget that will be prepared by the city and the county late spring, early summer through July of this year. There are enough other things on the plate of, I won't speak for the city, but of the county, more specifically our initiatives that I've talked about previously, that I don't see it rising to the level of actually getting the millions in funding to make the changes to the building. And the building or buildings personally that I think have the most justification is, in my mind, the health facility first, and second of all, the courthouse. But the logistics of doing the courthouse are just horrific. The likelihood that the county will fund either of those during 2017 to be able to do that is probably pretty close to zero, unless some group or individuals organize a campaign to put pressure on the county administrator and the county commissioners to say it should be a higher priority. Then it might have some shot. And the reason I don't think it has much chance is not that the county commissioners don't take it seriously. They're probably as vulnerable as anybody of somebody walking into a county commission meeting, being upset about a zoning decision and having somebody plug them. And yours truly is probably as likely as anybody else to be a target. But the priorities for the current commission are so focused on coming up with better mental health treatment options that the state has failed to do, and to modify the jail so we can actually treat people with mental health issues within the jail. And we've got a good chance of making people better and giving them training so they learn how not to get back into the jail. We're so focused on those priorities that it's probably caused this to take a back seat. However, I work for the commissioners work for you all, and if somebody were to come and say, we appreciate your focus over here, but this really is a serious issue. When I think back to when Brownback signed the amendments to the concealed carry law, removing the requirements for licensing and training, and saying that the residents of Kansas have proven themselves to all be responsible gun owners, I'm going to go ... there because I might say something about unprofessional. It's your turn. I need to get myself under control about
What doesn't,
Oops, sorry.
can we ask a question now?
Sure.
Absolutely.
It seems to me, though, that this is just a very tip of it, isn't it? I mean, throughout, considering the mental health of the state or nation, it doesn't look good. Because if you're a clerk in any shop on the high street, sooner or later you're going to have individuals that are upset about something you have done or have not done to make them happy. Now, I'm a volunteer at Just Food. I had a package of wieners thrown at me. We recognize, we're constantly telling each other that reminding us that, look, these folks that come in here are hurting. And, they're not, sometimes they're hurting worse sometimes than others. It's very stressful for them to come in and particularly the first time, when they're registering, How many times I've seen formerly college graduated people who were having had a previous life of middle class crying as they filled out a form saying, I never thought I'd do this. I wonder about, are we all, we're putting ourselves into really unbelievable situations, and this has come up a lot lately as more talk about the open carry. People who work in places like Just Food, certainly at Bird Nash, certainly in the health, and to do with the courthouse. So I think, but this, I would think that if I were a business owner on the high street, I would not be happy.
Yeah, you all.
Do I have to let them walk in my store with the gun?
I'm going to give an answer that's not technical, and she's going to give a better answer, I'm sure. But the other side of this issue, which is the panel members who aren't here, would be you're actually safer when you permit the people to carry a gun in. So when that person comes in who's upset, there's somebody there to defend themselves and defend others. And the people who take that side of the argument are just as passionate about it as you and I are, and probably most everybody, if not everybody in this room, are the other way. And the reality is that when you leave the city limits of Lawrence and you're somewhere else in Kansas, most meetings this size would find more people arguing the other side of that. And some of them are packing a gun, and one of them is probably my son-in-law, who I love dearly, who lives in Lebo, Kansas, who absolutely defends his right to all of his firearms. So you're right, that argument wins with me, but I'm afraid for most other people, and particularly the people of Kansas have had the wisdom to elect to go to Topeka, most of them would take the other point of view. Yeah, she's going to give you an answer that's less emotional than mine, I'm sure.
I just wanted to point out that the law only applies to state or municipal-owned buildings, not to private businesses.
Okay.
The Attorney General has a website dedicated to concealed carry and has some really good resources for private businesses. They are still able to hang signs, and the Attorney General has copies of those on their website, but I did just want to point out that this only applies to government buildings.
Well, but then let's be clear, and I want to be clear. The sign you held up a minute ago, outlawing a gun in a shop, that could continue to do so in a private, in a local business. The local business here could still.
Yeah.
And
So I
say, if I own a business and somebody tries to walk in my shop with an AK-47 strapped to the back, I can say, sir, not in here.
Well, I have visited the Attorney General's website, and they do have signs for private businesses as well as this one, which applies to the government buildings.
I see.
So
your answer is yes, I can.
yes, I mean, I can't give
Wouldn't
legal
be that
advice to a
sign.
private individual, but yes, there are different signs that you can
That's right.
see.
She's bound by more codes of ethics than I am. I don't think either of us have anything to add, so we're into the free-for-all part
Yeah, if you have
here.
any questions?
I have a concern about the Dole building on campus, which I understand campus is a whole other matter, but that is the building where all the children go to preschool. And I've been extremely concerned about that. Do you have anything to say about that?
Dole's not city, so I don't really have a comment.
Well, that is neither city nor county. I know that the university has people working on those issues, but I have no idea what the plans are of the university
Yeah,
in any specific building.
probably something to stay tuned to, though, since there's a time limit on it. Yes.
Oh, I think our board members were also concerned about recreation facilities, because there are a lot of school-age children at Rock Chalk Park, at the recreation centers, well, and in the library, other buildings. And how are those going to be secured? by 2017?
So both of those are currently under the exemption. So this law requiring the city to allow firearms inside does not apply currently. So they're subject to the same rule that by January 1st, 2018, we'll either have to have metal detectors in those facilities or allow firearms inside.
But we'd be thinking about similar sums to what Craig mentioned
Yes.
to secure them.
Yes. I mean, metal detector wand, I think when we looked at, just off my memory, was a couple of hundred, but then you get more expensive metal detectors that become even more expensive in the couple of thousands if they're movable and can slide around if you ever wanted to move them for different entrances. And then on top of that, you might have an X-ray bag scanner, which costs a couple of extra thousand. And then, like I said, the most expensive item would be personnel, times 2 or 3.
But isn't Rock Chalk gonna have the Junior Olympics?
So the sports pavilion is the city, so that's going to be part of the discussion that the commission has. It's difficult for me to say what will happen to those buildings. We just have to stay tuned and see what the local governing body.
One major entrance though, doesn't it? I mean,
Sports pavilion?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excuse my ignorance, I forgot, they first passed the law that allowed concealed carry with a license.
Yes.
And then they later passed the law that you could conceal carry with no permit, no license. When did they, start allowing, or saying that everybody could go into every public building carry? Did
So-
that come with the first or the second?
That was the first one that came out in 2013, that bill. And then the law that says you no longer need a concealed carry license happened last year.
So it sounds to me like maybe this conversation is almost premature. Now we know the problems, but there aren't any solutions in place.
Well, I don't think it's premature. The message that I'm giving you is, unless there's a groundswell of support for spending some very, very significant dollars for the city facilities with the city commission, with county facilities with the county commission, in the budget process that we'll be engaging in starting in about a month, where we're starting the process of developing the budget in 2017, anything that's done to secure those buildings is gonna have to be done in 2017. So the budget decisions for that year are gonna take place over the next few months. And I can tell you that I have not had anybody come to me and say, "You're gonna secure the old courthouse, aren't you?" Particularly after I tell them how much it will cost. I've had 0 people come to me and say, "You're gonna figure out a way to secure the mental health facility, aren't you?" No one has come and said that. And unless there's a groundswell of support to the county commissioners and city commissioners that needs to be done, it won't happen. Now, she won't say that, because, well, maybe she will, but
Well, I was only gonna add to that public safety is definitely a priority for the city commission, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to the discussion. But I think definitely public input will be important, but it's an independent, very important issue to them.
so when you say it's premature, I would say no. I would say it's very well timed, because if there's going to be any groundswell of support to spend those kinds of tax dollars, which will entail a tax increase to make it happen. Now, to complicate it further, there's 2 bills in the legislature right now that fixed the lid that was passed by the legislature last year, about 30 days after they were supposed to have adjourned, before it was even introduced. That bill passed as a part of the final compromise that enabled them to balance their budget. And so this year, they're trying to fix it. Now, fixing the lid that they passed with one day of discussion in the last legislature, from the point of view of Luke Bell, who represents the realtors of the state, is totally different than fixing it from the point of view of the city and county organizations. We're looking for reasonable exemptions for things maybe like this. He's looking for eliminating all the exemptions because they want to keep the property taxes as low as possible. And so where we've asked for exemptions where the state has put additional mandates on us, they don't want that because that's too loose. And besides, governments are way too big anyway, so if we're forced to cut back every year, that's a good thing because government is bad. Obviously, I have a different philosophy because I chose local government as a career for the last 40 years and I happen to believe in it. But if that law comes into effect with the effective date of this July, which is what's in one of the bills, then we're under the budget lid now, and anything we do to add the cost will in fact require an election to be okayed. Okay? So I think it's likely, though, that they will move the effective date up to January 1, 2017, which means this is the last budget that we're not under those restrictions. If that's the case, it's in the interest of the local governments, this is going to sound bad, but to increase our budget as much as possible because the budget this year will establish the lid for all future years until we elect some people that have a little bit more common sense. So,
What would it take to change the law?
having a majority of the House and the Senate vote to change the law.
And what would,
How
how
do
would
we
you
get a
want to change?
groundswell to change the law?
What the
Give us suggestions.
Well, frankly, I think the chances that this legislature would even consider a bill like that is like less than zero. Okay? You could introduce the law, you could get our legislative delegation from Douglas County to unanimously support it, including the Republicans. The problem is not our legislators, it's not the people that you and I elected, it's most of the rest of the state. So if you brought a bill to change that law with current legislature, it would not even get a hearing, and you'd get laughed at. Well, there goes Lawrence again, being a bunch of liberal communists. Okay, literally. So the process of getting that law changed is going to require some kind of sea change of getting back to the traditional moderate policies that typically have been the hallmark of both Republicans and Democrats in Kansas up until Brownback's election. But right now, I mean, I can give you the technical answer of you can get one of your legislatures here to introduce the legislation. I can get Marcy to do it in the Senate.
Well, stepping back from introducing a law to figures you were just giving us, we have so much money to spend on metal detectors, mental health, education. How do we get those figures before the public so they can make choices? Would I rather spend it on mental health so people don't want to carry guns, or on metal detectors?
Well, in terms of the legislature, their philosophy of the vast majority is that enabling people to carry guns into public buildings makes us safer, not less secure. So you do have to get beyond it, but it's such an emotional issue on both sides. I mean, I was thinking after some of the school shootings and massacres in different places that maybe there was some hope to get some rational gun legislation and some rational gun control. And in fact, I remember the first 24 hours after the Connecticut massacre of children that the NRA didn't speak up for at least 24 or 36 hours. I said, finally, maybe we'll have a chance for some rational gun control, okay? But after about 36 hours, the NRA doubled down. Connecticut that year passed some very good legislation. That's the only state that reacted in a, from my point of view, a positive way. The rest of them, or at least the state of Kansas, went the other
Oh,
way.
no, I was just gonna, I wasn't gonna, just grounded in tragedy.
Yeah.
Do you have any, like, real idea about the prevalence of concealed carry in Kansas, or? Because nobody has to, like, have a license, there's really no way to know.
I guess, I don't have an exact number on that. I know the number is probably less now that you don't need a permit, but the advantage to having a concealed carry permit in Kansas, even though you don't have to have one, is so you can have reciprocity in other states when you travel. If somebody,
So there might be, like, the number of concealed carries might be a proxy for how much prevalence there is of concealed carry.
yeah, possibly, yeah.
I remember the numbers went up dramatically the last couple of years.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I remember reading that. I don't remember the number though, but it went up.
An issue, if someone's carrying and they're acting a little nervous, you can't ask the policeman to ask them to see their permit, because they don't have to have a permit.
Correct.
And they don't have, I don't think the law has any prerogative
No
until they
training.
start doing something.
That's
I don't
because
know.
the residents of Kansas have proven themselves all to be responsible, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Sam Brownback told me that, so I'm sure it's true.
He speaks with.
I'm being more blunt tonight than I probably should be.
Well, other counties are going through the same thing, and I'm thinking about where I grew up in southeastern Kansas. Cherokee County has got to face, Crawford County has to face the same thing about securing their courthouse, do they not? And when you mentioned the cost of refiguring or redesigning a building, the courthouse in Columbus, Kansas, for example. So it's gonna cost, one thing, that's gonna raise taxes, got to, how else is it gonna come by the money to do it?
Well, there's a
You
sig-
can't raise taxes because of the.
Correct, which means that it won't happen. And most of those counties in western Kansas did not even file for the exemption. So they're under the law now because they didn't file for the exemption.
So that's the option, is just to let everybody carry. Can you
Until-
talk about
no.
training the staff in the courthouse and arming them? Not that I'm suggesting that.
Well, there hasn't been any talk of intentionally us arming county employees, no. I have had county employees who've asked me for clarification if they can carry their gun in their county vehicle. I have had on-call paramedics who are the first responders in the county ask if they can carry when they're responding to a medical emergency. And the answer to that question was, we can't prohibit you from having a gun with you in the car. We can prohibit you from, having it in a holster and carrying it when you're actually treating somebody who's had a heart attack or getting them in the ambulance. And after some pretty thorough discussion with the on-call first responders, they all agreed that that was a good policy. But we can't prevent them from having a gun with them when they're called and having it in their vehicle. We do have discussions with people of the sheriff's office. Sheriff's office is responsible for securing all county buildings, whether it's inside the city limits or not. And the police department does the same for the city. And we do have discussions about what the plans are, and that we don't discuss openly because we really don't want people to know where we have panic buttons or whatever. But we do have some panic buttons in some of the county facilities that contact then dispatch directly that something's going on. I don't know if that answers your question or not. But.
I was kind of facetious, but not really. Yeah.
The university is under the same deadline as everybody else, all universities, colleges, they have the same deadline.
If they took their exemption at the same time, so it's 4 years after you filed for the exemption, but the same law would apply. Yeah, it's a 4-year exemption. Did you have a question? Or I thought someone here was going to say something.
Ask me something that I can give you a really happy answer.
Well, the sum total of it is this, isn't it? If we do nothing, and we just take the position of, say, out in western Kansas, okay, well, don't worry about it. Don't have to spend that money raising, doing it. Does the county have any current plans, does the city have current plans to have, to spend this kind of money on,
We figured out what,
yeah, you
we figured out what it would cost in the old courthouse, and while the commissioners never explicitly decided that they weren't gonna do that, in effect, if they had done that, we would have lost our exemption, because the exemption is based on the fiction that we have plans to secure the building. So we don't want to make the public explicit decision that we're not going to spend that kind of money, because then we come under the law immediately. Okay? Catch-22 there. Yeah.
Now, what's the status of the judicial building? They have
Judicial building we secured about 10 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago. We had enough situations where either because of somebody on trial or somebody that might support the person on trial, or a divorce battle that potentially was going to get violent, that we had enough real situations with real risk that the county commission went ahead and bit the bullet, and so that building is secure. If you go into that building, you go through a metal detector, and if you've got a gun or a knife on you or any kind of weapon, you get sent back to your car. And we have 2 armed police sheriff's deputies that are there to put you through the process. And when I go see the sheriff, like I did this morning, I empty everything out of my pockets and I go through the process.
Will that key date, will that change anything at that point?
No. No, we are in full compliance with that law. Nothing will change.
Is that true? Are all the judicial buildings in Kansas, so they all have this type of setup?
No. No, in fact, probably most of them don't. I think if you go to the bigger counties, they probably most of them do. I haven't done a survey, but you remember the federal building about 10 or 15 years ago where somebody came in and someplace in northeastern Kansas? Well, that was the event that caused the county commissioners to take a look at the law enforcement building and go ahead and bite the bullet at that point.
I was just going to say, I used to be a prosecutor in Seward County, southwest Kansas, and at the courthouse there was no security when I was there. And I think that was true of a lot of nearby counties as well.
I'm a former city administrator of Scott City, Kansas. We had 18 employees total. So the process of securing the Scott City Hall would have been a 25% increase in our total number of employees. Okay? Reality check, there's no way a Scott City or a Scott County is going to be able to afford what the legislature in its wisdom has decided needs to be done for us to protect our public servants. I should have shut up a few minutes ago.
Does anybody else have any other comments or questions or anything else? Go ahead.
Thank you, Craig, for all your comments.
Well, you can probably tell you all are a group that I'm extraordinarily comfortable with. And I'm no less comfortable since Chris Kobach has declared you to be whatever he said you were.
We're communists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wear it with pride.
Yeah, I think we do. Sonny?
What state would you suggest people move to?
Canada.
I love Lawrence. I love Douglas County. I love working for this community. And there's probably no other place I could work where I could talk to you as frankly about these things as I do with you all. There's no other place in Kansas. So I'm going to stay right here.